Hello and welcome back. Today's guest is Kate Sarginson, and I have been trying so hard to get her on the podcast for the last 2 months or so. She has a full-time career, she's a businesswoman, she has a family, and she runs a community of around 300 entrepreneurial businesswomen here in KL. She's going to share with us her tips and tricks for networking, how she's built a community, and the value that a community adds to your personal and your business life. Really inspirational conversation, and she drops some tips and tricks for those of you that are looking to get into networking or building your own community as well. I hope you really enjoy the episode, and if I could just ask one favor, if you haven't already, if you could please drop a like and subscribe. It goes a long way and it would make me very happy. So thank you so much. So, Kate, thank you so much for joining me. You have been in Malaysia for around 17 years now. Tell me about what led you to this part of the world.
Sure. So I came initially for a holiday. My dad was working here with the British High Commission, and I had already been living overseas. And I thought I'll use this as an opportunity to save some money, come and see my dad, have a few great experiences here in Malaysia, and then go on to travel around the region and Australia and New Zealand. So I did that. I packed my bag for 3 weeks to be in Malaysia and then went on my travels. And I actually wanted to go back to Australia and do the working holiday visa and kind of continue my travels and continue trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. And whilst I was back in Malaysia, sort of figuring that out, I had the opportunity to go to Langkawi for a business trip. And there it was the Langkawi International Maritime and Air Show. So that was with the Red Arrows, a lot of big corporates in Malaysia, and including AirAsia. So they were one of the kind of co-hosts of the event, basically. So I met Tony Fernandez at the party. We ended up kind of going on to another dinner and drinks thing. And I hadn't really spoken to him very much, but in the end, he offered me a job to join him at AirAsia in a role that was all around sort of sports and corporate culture. And I thought he was absolutely mad. I said thanks, but no thanks, because I was planning to go back to Australia. But I didn't really know who he was, to be honest. And then as I understood more and more, people kind of comparing him to the Richard Branson of Asia, I thought to myself, well, actually, maybe I don't say no just yet. I'll find out a little bit more about the opportunity. And yeah, I made the decision to stay on, honestly thinking that it would be for 1 or 2 years. I'd go back to Australia still. I was still in my early 20s thinking I had the world as my oyster. So, yeah, and in the end, I stayed there for 5 years, and amongst all of that, met my now husband and just built a life in Malaysia. And we've just stayed here ever since, and it's not really been anything intentional. But yeah, I'm very grateful that I came to visit my dad and that he was working here, and he was here for a couple of years after I stayed, so got to share a bit of that time with him as well. But then, had already made a life and enjoying myself from then on.
So complete serendipity that caused you to set up roots here and
yes,
build a family.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny because I remember saying goodbye to my mum at the airport when I thought I was going to go for this sort of 3 or 4 month trip to Malaysia and Australia and New Zealand and the region. And I said, don't worry, I'll see you back at Christmas. And my mum said, I just have this feeling I don't think you're going to come back. And I was like, no, of course I'm going to come back. And 17 years later, married, 2 kids, and very happy and settled in life in Malaysia, but wouldn't have scripted it.
No, definitely not. And what would living in the UK feel like to you now, do you think?
I actually have no idea. I mean, I never lived in the UK after university. So from university, I went straight to Spain teaching English and English language there. So I've not had any kind of adult experience living in the UK. So I think it would feel very foreign. I think it would feel like an adventure, but in a very different stage of life. Suddenly going back to England now would be very different. But it's not off the cards, but nothing planned in the immediate future.
100%. You get accustomed to where you're staying at the moment, right? And
yeah, absolutely. And you build a life. And my husband's also an entrepreneur. So he has, multiple businesses and business interests here. And your network, especially if you're an entrepreneur or in any kind of business, is so powerful. And for both of us, our networks are here. My husband's been in Asia 20 plus years as well. So our networks are here, and now obviously our family is here as well. So it would need to be the right timing and for the right reasons for us to make a shift back. Yeah.
100%. They say your network is your net worth.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And speaking of that, you have built quite a big community here in KL. I'd heard of you long before I met you with the On the Rise. Would you mind explaining a little bit about what that is and what it does?
Yeah, absolutely. On the Rise is a community for female founders and women in business to come together and be a part of something bigger than just themselves. I think entrepreneur life, it can be really challenging, but also just life in general, and the labels that we all wear can be extremely overwhelming at times. And so we wanted to create a space, and I say we, the community kind of wanted to create a space where we could be a tonic to that, and a place where people could come, meet like-minded women, feel supported, find help, and find, connections with people that can facilitate them in life and also in their business. And so the community has grown now in the last 2 years to almost 400 members, and that is in industry sectors from, fashion and lifestyle to well-being to tech, and it's startups, it's people who are got a corporate role. It might also be people who have got a corporate role looking to do something different. So they're trying to explore other future ventures. It's a really, really eclectic, beautiful mix of members that's grown. It started really accidentally with me kind of bringing a few people together for a coffee and a chat with a friend of mine who was visiting, who was an expert in email marketing. And I just thought, lots of people don't know about this subject. Why don't I bring together some people that I know who are in business that might find this interesting? And also just create a space where people could connect on a business level as well. So, KL is a small place, once you make a few connections, but not always has there been a space for people to come on a business level, but not kind of hardcore business networking, something that's a bit warmer, a bit friendlier. And so that was how it started with 8 of us in Bangsar. But the kind of energy that was felt that day and the positivity that was around the table, and it just felt really right. And I think people felt something that they hadn't been a part of before, and I don't think I had been either. And so that grew into a WhatsApp community of around 10 or 15 people, because I thought I'd invite the other people who couldn't make it. And then that was sort of purely through word of mouth, sort of 50 people in that WhatsApp group within a few weeks. And then we hosted our first event with really no game plan. I was like, I just think I'm kind of leaning into what feels right and leaning into the positivity and seeing where it takes the community.
So was this not something that you'd really planned either? It was something that just...
Well, it's a little bit of both. I had ideas about something like this. I had an idea about creating a community and a space for women for probably a few years before that, sort of various random note-taking in my book with ideas, but I just didn't know where to start. And I kind of thought, well, who's going to join and how would I host it and how would I charge for it? And there was all these questions, and I just kind of put it in the too hard basket. I was like, oh, well, it's not really right now. I don't know how I'm going to do this. So there had definitely been some seeds sown over the years, but I just never knew how to get it off the ground. But I think when I've had an opportunity to reflect on it a little bit more about why has On the Rise become something that I feel so proud of, for one, but I'm also so passionate about. And I sort of reflected a little bit on what communities meant to me over my lifetime, actually, not even just as a sort of an entrepreneur or as this stage of my life, but, community is something about being a part of something that everyone agrees in. It's not sort of somebody here saying, this is what I believe in and this is what you need to believe in. It's not a boss and a, culture. It's a collective sense of belonging, and it's a collective sense of we're in this for something, not just ourselves. And it ultimately comes down to providing a sense of belonging, which is what everyone wants to find in life. And I think that's something that I've always looked for in life, a sense of belonging in school, in university, in everything else, really. And sport has been a big part of my life. And I've always found that an easy sense of identity and an easy sense of community for me. But there's lots of times in my life where I haven't really found that. And I've sort of struggled and bounced around and figuring out who I am and how to for how to discover who I am in life and in business and all these other labels. And so I think for me, On the Rise has actually been the accumulation of so many of my life experiences, and just sort of stumbled into actually finding a way to bring that together and bring that sense of belonging and bring that sense of community to other women who I think have also probably struggled in one way or another. And that to me is so special, because our members are just such a rich sort of multicultural, multi-experience group of women. And you think, well, how can you be united? What is bringing people together? And it is that sense of pitching in and being a part of something and supporting one another, which has happened, just on so many different levels within the community, which is, for me, the sense of success is not how many members that we have, but actually how much connection happens in our community. Through our WhatsApp groups or through our events, you see people coming together, and they then go off and do things together. They host events together, or they do collaborations, or they support one another, or they become each other's clients. Just so many different examples. And that's really the sort of success metric for me. And it's kind of evolving, as the community grows.
For you, it's about the value that you can add and that you're seeing in other people's lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've seen the energy that happens in an On the Rise event, and people connecting and feeling like they can be comfortable in those spaces, which isn't always if you talk about a networking event, that's probably for a lot of people, it's their worst nightmare. They don't want to go into a room and be exchanging business cards and feeling like they're on show and all those sorts of things. Like, the essence of all of our events is creating a vibrant, lively, friendly, warm space that people can come and be a part of. And that's something that we try and emulate at all of our events, whether it's, a small group or a much larger group. We had our first summit this year, which was the Rise Summit. And, that was about breaking down the norms of what people think about what a summit should look like and feel like. We wanted to make it different. We had music playing, we had a much more, lively and interactive setting. And that is what we wanted to sort of exude from me as the founder and one of the, kind of leaders speaking, but also all of our speakers, all of our guests. How can they walk away feeling like they've been a part of something different, that they feel like has really resonated with them?
Do you think prior to On the Rise, you felt that being a woman in business perhaps made it more difficult?
Yeah, I think so. I feel like some industries are more challenging than others in general to just kind of be involved in, and some are more challenging specifically for women. But I think I was fortunate in that my first exposure and real experience in this sort of land of entrepreneurship was with a UK startup called Well To Do, which was led by Lauren, a fantastic founder and still a very good friend of mine. And that was all around the wellness scene. So wellness startups, and it was a B2B platform for the wellness industry. And the wellness industry is actually not so dominated by men. It's quite more equal amongst men and women. So I think I had a slightly softer, I suppose, approach into the entrepreneurial life. But for a lot of women, yes, I think it is much more challenging to not necessarily be impactful and be important and have make changes and feel like you're making a difference. But it can be more challenging to find other people that are like you. And that's what we're all looking for in life ultimately, is finding people who have the same values and the same outlook. And the likelihood is that women are going to have, different impacts and different influences on their outlook that make having other women around more beneficial. So I was asked the question actually recently, are you sort of like anti-men, or is that something that's important? Like, why do we need separate women groups? And I think there's a space for everything, but I think there is still a valid space for women who can just be seen for seen for themselves, and to get support from other like-minded women to be a part of, lots of other avenues for people to be supporting themselves and their personal and professional development.
100%. I think even as a 6'2", 220-pound man, I find it daunting going to networking events, right? And meeting multi-millionaire business people and hoping that they take me seriously. And I think for a young woman who's up and coming into that environment, it could be extremely hard as well.
Yeah, I mean, we have so many. Every time we host an event, I mean, we hosted one just a couple of weeks ago, and probably 50% of the people in the room, it was their first time to an On the Rise event. And for a lot of them, and every event we have, when we have new attendees, like a lot of them haven't been to a networking event before. So I feel like a sense of duty to ensure that they have a really, even more so than usual, more like a really positive experience, because it is really daunting. And I'm hoping that in the content that we put out on social media and the word of mouth from our members, and that's our strongest, we don't do any solid marketing. It's really all through word of mouth and some, thought through intentional content on Instagram to help to showcase the energy that we are about and to showcase the kinds of people that come to our events, so that it makes it a little bit less daunting and it kind of is reflective of what we do. But yeah, we want to make sure that people come to our events and they already feel relaxed and welcomed. And that is a really easy thing for me to know that happens, because all of our members are just so warm and inviting and welcoming. And that's kind of an innate part of the unwritten code of On the Rise, is that if you're part of our community, then you equally are welcoming to everybody else as well.
I think there's two parts on that. One is, as you say, because it's a group of women that probably all have that same fear when it comes to networking, and there is that sort of sense of tribalism. Okay, we're all doing this. The second thing is you definitely lead from the front. And I noticed this when I came to the On the Rise event, and there was over 1,000 people there, I think. In all
no, there was a few hundred. There was a couple, 200 or 300. Yeah, not 1,000 yet.
Well, regardless, I watched you, and myself included, walk your way around and introduce yourself to everyone that was there and ask them, what they were doing, where they were from, and giving them that background. And that goes a long way. I find at a networking event, it's like a case of dominoes. Once you've met the first person and that chat's gone well, then you have the confidence that, okay, I'm not as socially awkward as I think I am.
Yeah.
And you might also realize that the person that you go and introduce yourself to, they're probably suffering the same sort of imposter syndrome or anxiety in being in that situation.
Yes, totally. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I'm probably somebody who comes across as being really confident and could walk into a room. And on a certain level now, I probably do feel relatively confident in those spaces, but I definitely haven't always been. And I think it just takes one friendly person to kind of help you to switch your mindset and to feel like you can just like take a sigh of relief and, okay, it's not going to be as terrible as I thought this, networking thing was going to be. But yeah, I think that's something that I like to connect people, and that is obviously part of what I do with On the Rise, but that's always been something that I've kind of been drawn to, because I think you just never know the next person you're going to meet. Like, and it's not just who they know, it's who it's not just the people in the room, it's who the people in the room know as well. And like, you just never know where a connection might lead you. And I think living in Malaysia and building the network that I have over the last few years, I think back, there's some connections that I have made maybe in the last 10 or 15 years that are still coming back. And I'm like, oh, I know someone actually who could help me in this situation. And I think if you can lean into the power of your network like that, then it also helps you to appreciate that sparking that initial contact for yourself or for helping somebody else make that initial contact, then, it goes a long way. And most people are really nervous and in those sorts of environments. So I definitely, take it on my shoulders in the context of On the Rise, but it's something that I kind of do naturally amongst friends and things like that as well.
I think the people in KL, especially the females that have access to the On the Rise group, are quite lucky that they've got a structured environment that's specifically tailored to help them get started with networking. Whereas a lot of people in other situations aren't going to have that facility on their doorstep and are going to have to do networking the hard way, right? By getting to whining and dining situations or balls and so on, where it's less welcoming. What sort of tips would you give to young people having to get stuck into their first taste of networking?
That's a good question. I think there's a couple of things that I feel would be helpful. I think in any situation, if you know you're going to a networking event, I'd try to think about if there's anyone in particular that that you want to meet, whether it's a business or a specific person. Because then you can have some like structure and strategy to the room, rather than just kind of bouncing around, just desperate for any kind of conversation. If you know that you want to speak to somebody from XYZ brand or whatever, then figure out a way to make that happen and find your way around the room that way with a bit more direction. Somebody once said, and I can't remember who it was, like, you're either there to network or you're there to eat and drink. You can't do both. So either go and have a few nibbles and drinks and then go and network or whatever. Don't kind of let the other one lead you to astray. And then I think the other thing is that most people are really nervous, and if you're also feeling nervous, just ask people questions. Like, people love to be asked questions. People love to talk about themselves. So you can just ask a few really good questions, and that person will probably walk away going, God, I had such a great conversation, even if they've not asked you a single question. So I think just being armed with some good questions and looking and feeling like, kind of engaging and being a good listener can be half the battle. It's not always about kind of shoving yourself in anyone's face and sort of presenting yourself that way.
It's literally the opposite. As you were saying, it's about how much the person spoke and how interesting they felt. And there is a word for extroversion, where you just get someone else to talk about themselves. I'm trying to think of what it was, but I forget it now. But anyway, there was a study that found there was a direct correlation between how much a person enjoyed the conversation and how much they spoke about themselves. So don't feel like you have to go up to someone at a networking event and convince them that you're really interesting.
No,
because
totally.
That's going to have the opposite effect, and your nerves will show through. But if you go up, as you say, and ask a couple of well-poised questions, and make them feel interesting, such as what do they do, why do they do it, and then let them go from there. Yeah,
totally. And just say, oh, that's so interesting. Can you tell me more about that? And they'll go on again. And I think, being a good listener is a fantastic life skill in general, whether that's in a networking context or just in a life context or leadership space or anything. So you can apply those kind of simple theories into the networking sort of format as well. Yeah. And just making people comfortable by being a good listener, laughing a little bit, that sort of thing can go a long way.
100%. Just letting yourself show and put your guard down a little bit as well. Most people there, unless they're old and seasoned networkers, are probably going to be just as nervous as you are. And if they are old and seasoned networkers, they'll probably see what you're trying to do and at least offer you a bit of support.
Yeah, and they might not be that good. Just because someone's been working a room for 20 years of their career, it might not make them good networkers. They might just be, they might just be interpreted in a really different way by most other people. So
100%. So the drive for Building on the Rise, it was around building a community, and that has obviously helped with your personal growth as well. How would you say the two have supplemented each other?
Yeah, I think On the Rise wouldn't have happened, 5-10 years ago. I wouldn't have had the inclination or the life skills to even make it happen, because there are still quite a lot of things that go into making On the Rise happen. We do have quite a lot of structure. We do curate all the events really intentionally, because I don't want it to just be a group of women coming together on a WhatsApp chat and, promoting themselves and selling themselves to people. There's a lot of kind of structure and intentionality that goes into all of our events, whether that's more of the educational events or the connection, networking events, or that we also do well-being events as well. So I think it wouldn't have evolved at all certainly not to what it is today, if that sort of been 5-10 years ago. And I think, having had that opportunity to also now reflect, as I have done, about kind of that meaning of why community has been so important to me. And what I didn't mention there is that one of the things that really triggered me realizing that was when I was 16, 17 years old, I had a scholarship to join the Navy in the UK, and I was very close to accepting it. It was a pretty big step in my life. And, I had all kind of people in my life saying what a fantastic this was. My school was super happy. My parents were elated that I had a plan. And I was very close to accepting it. But suddenly I just sort of managed to allow myself to take a step back and understand what was I really doing? Why was I joining the Navy and really signing away the next 7 years of my life? Because as a scholarship, you got to go to university and then do the years afterwards. So I took a step back, and eventually I made the decision not to join. And apart from like a really fun anecdote, I'd never really thought too much about that time. But what I realized is that I was looking for community. I was looking for a sense of belonging, and I was looking for an identity that I didn't feel like existed anywhere else in my life. And that's often what I feel like is my kind of natural draw to community and sense of connection and so on, which enables me to approach kind of what I'm doing with On the Rise and what I'm doing with my life in general, like in a very different way now. I think, for most people in their 20s, maybe early 30s, like I found I wasn't really doing anything with much intention. I was sort of going day to day, figuring out what felt good and having fun and making memories and trying to make friends, and not even really thinking about too much about who I was as a person. And I definitely describe myself as a recovering people pleaser and perfectionist, which is quite a challenging combination of things. But that's for me what I was doing in my sort of 20s and 30s. Whereas now I think I'm still figuring out who I am, and I think that's a continual journey through life. But I'm able to take a step back a little bit more and try to think about what I'm doing and what am I doing and who am I doing it for? And if it's not for me and for my family, then I can make certain different decisions. So I think On the Rise, especially now, I'm working full time now as well, and having On the Rise, I can't do everything that I want to do. And I am a doer. I like to sort of get things done and so on. So I can't do that anymore. So I have to be a lot more intentional about my life and about how I'm spending my time, because every single minute of my day is now is a commitment. It's either sleeping or it's time with my kids, or it's full-time work, or it's On the Rise, or it's exercising, or it's social. Like every single sort of block of time is a trade-off, because if I do one, I can't do the other. In a much more direct way than I think I've ever kind of really appreciated it. And it's been a big shift for me going into full-time employment again as well. So I think all of that has happened alongside or as a result of, I guess, personal growth, and trying to find a way to make sure that I'm surrounding myself with the right people that I want in my life, that make me feel good and that sort of are the right support for me. And also questioning things a little bit more than I ever used to. And so I think On the Rise has been a fantastic way also for me to do that, which has come naturally as I've sort of got older and more realistic with what I can and can't do in life.
You mentioned in your 20s it was living without much intentionality and you didn't really know where you were going. Do you think you should have been?
I think that's definitely the time of your life to do that and to have that. But I do feel like nobody really sat me down at any time and said, have a fantastic, time in your 20s and live sort of footloose and fancy free and with fewer responsibilities and everything, but really know yourself and do the work to get to know yourself, because that's the most important relationship. And I'm kind of the lack of me doing that previously is coming back to catch up with me now, and it's something that I'm really consciously trying to invest my time in kind of prioritizing, because when you do lead a life where you don't have that kind of sense of real personal accountability and knowing of yourself, you can bounce around a little bit. And I think for me, growth has meant actually really prioritizing my own sense of self and getting to know my own sense of self now and having confidence in that, which part of that is realizing you can't say yes to everybody, and that's realizing you can't do everything. And I'm classic. I struggle with that still, but it's a work in progress. We're all work in progresses. So, but I think it takes reflection and it takes acknowledging your past and your past experiences to be able to get to that point, to then know, oh, okay, this is what I want to do now to make my life what I want it to be now.
One of the things that's refreshing for me hearing you say that, and another guest that I had on previously, is there's an epidemic of 20-year-olds that feel like they've got no direction or purpose at the moment. And I was the same as you throughout my 20s, the earlier part of my 20s at least. I was just going where the wind took me, and without knowing where I wanted to go, without knowing what I was even trying to achieve, it was just getting through one day to the next. And it's great that there are examples that you don't need to force that in your 20s. If you're of the mindset where you already have an idea of what you want to go, where you want to go and what you want to do, then great, work towards it. But if you don't, it will come to you over time, and you will build life experience. You will build a network as you go.
Yeah.
And that will give you a better idea. And there will be a point where the idea that's right for you is apparent. And then you get that sense of direction to work towards.
Yeah, totally. And I think you've just I think you just got to have that anchor of knowing who you are, and that is something that I just didn't really spend a huge amount of time doing previously. Like I was happy with who I was, but I just didn't really spend very much time reflecting on that and taking the space. And that is something I think everyone should spend time doing that. Yeah.
Do you think it's harder doing it later on in life than it would have been doing it younger?
Not harder, but you've kind of got more life lessons to look back on, I guess. And you've probably got to just unpack a little bit more than you would do if you were doing it earlier on. But it's everyone is so unique in what their life experiences are, in terms of, it's what's happening to you, but it's also how you're responding to everything as well, and the help that you're getting, or the network that you can lean on, or the community that you can lean on. All of that is so unique. So I don't think there's any rule that it's easier when you're younger and harder when you're older. I think it's just all about your own self-awareness and building out whatever your community looks like, whether that's your family, your social circle, your on the rise or an equivalent, and your friends, whatever that looks like to you, as long as you've got the right people around you. But life sometimes it takes you a while to figure out what that is, and so it's kind of like your personal evolution and your life experiences are so interwoven. But unless you stop and think, unless you stop and reflect, I think it's really easy to just get lost along the way.
And how do you have time for a full-time job, raising a family, and managing a community of hundreds of entrepreneurial women?
I don't know if I do, actually, is the answer. There's definitely been a shift since I started full-time work again. And there are so many ideas and so much that I had in mind to pour into On the Rise. And we're still doing some fantastic events. And I'm really lucky that we've got a community and a committee that are really supportive. But everyone else has also got their full-time job or part-time job and family and life. So we do a really good job of managing ourselves as best as we can. And we do have a bit of a system now in terms of the kinds of events that we have and how we run them and that sort of thing. But it's really hard, and every decision impacts something. So, those blocks of time are really trade-offs for something. And it's really hard. I don't think there's anything that I'm doing to try and manage that even better. But I've also still in the process, again, everything's a work in progress of realizing that I can't do everything that I want to be able to do. I would be, I love sport and I love fitness. I would do that every single day, this time, and I'd pick up my kids from school, and then we'd, be able to do things, and there's just not that chance. But try and make the right decisions as many times as I can. Very lucky that my husband is incredibly supportive, and we definitely approach family life and kids life as a team. I don't think everyone is able to say that always. But yeah, we do as best as we can for that, and provide the opportunities that we can for them. But it's really hard, and it's a daily struggle. Trying to say no to things and prioritizing is just a much more of a part of my life than it was previously, when, my decisions now are about everything. Everything has an impact. Whereas when I was more of a, freelancing and entrepreneurial, like, my decisions I could still keep to myself in some context, because as long as I could do the right things for my family and, friends, and then I wouldn't have to trade off all the time. Whereas I have to do that a little bit more now.
One of the things you said in there was something a friend of mine actually had to remind me of. And I've read the book Atomic Habits by James Clear. But I had a bad week a couple of weeks ago where I felt like I was overloaded. I had task paralysis because I had so much that I needed to do. I needed to find a new home for all of my clients. I needed to build this financial course. Got another project, a side business that I'm trying to build at the same time. And I've got so much I didn't know where to look. And my productivity went completely the other way. I did barely anything for a week. And I was talking to one of my friends about it. Like, I know, and I'm just having this internal war within about it. And she said to me, it's the small decisions that add up. And I think, as Alex Hormozy says, we need to be reminded of stuff more than we need to be taught it. And you already know a lot of the things that you need to be doing, but you just needed that reminder. And I had her words ringing in my ear in the morning when I woke up, and I thought about just going on my phone for a bit before getting up. Before I went and ordered some junk food to make my diet even worse than it had been that week. It's the small decisions that if you can just make and win the little battles, they compound over time.
Yeah.
They just make your life easier.
Yeah, definitely. And you can't really be complacent, or not. I mean, it will maybe have an off day or so, but like you kind of have to be really, led by routine. And, that the more you succeed in those small bits and pieces, like the better your day is. Like we've got into ice baths recently at home. We have an ice bath, and I want to say I'm in it every day. I'm almost in it every day. But that sometimes in the morning can just be the biggest win. And then I'm like, well, I'm on a roll now. Like I can kind of attack the rest of the day because I've at least succeeded something in going like 3 or 4 degrees water for probably quite short periods of time in comparison to others. But I think, that massively helps if you can just make small, achievable goals. And for me, sometimes, I want to go for a run for half an hour, but if I've only got 15, 20 minutes, I'll still do it. And it's not my like A goal, but it's a B or a C version of it. And that kind of helps me to win rather than wipe it out totally. But yeah, I mean, calendars are key for my like life. I think, everything's in the calendar. And if it's not in the calendar, it's not going to happen.
I was big into cold dipping when I was back in the UK in Newcastle. And I was trying to convince one of my friends to come with me. And he came one morning and we went for a dip on the snowy beaches in Newcastle. The sea, I think it was about 9 degrees over the winter there. And when we got out, I said, and it's impossible to have a bad day when you start it with an ice bath. He's like, yes, because nothing can physically be worse.
Yeah. Oh, it's so brutal, but it is good. Yeah.
It is. It gives you a rush of endorphins. And as you say, you've already won a battle, a pretty big one at the start of the day, and that compounds. And you mentioned about an off day as well. But I don't know about you, I notice whenever I have an off day, it's harder to pick the routine back up the next day than it was if I was still on that roll.
Yeah.
And I get it, everyone's human. We're all going to have those days where we just have to do worse than usual, but then picking it back up again is hard. And if you let those bad days compound into a bad week, it's absolutely hell trying to pick it back up again.
But I think there's also something in the term of a bad day or the term of that, because I think for sometimes I certainly feel as somebody who doesn't say, I'm getting better at saying no and getting better at sort of giving myself space, that sometimes the reason that you're having that bad day is because you are exhausted and you actually really need to not force yourself into whatever that day was going to look like, and have the courage to say, actually, I need to rest. I need to take a step back, and I need to cancel X, Y, and Z, or whatever it might be, and not just be in a ball of like, oh, this is the worst day ever, and I can't believe I'm not achieving. But actually, that is the achievement of the day, and that actually can be really seen as success. And I'm certainly trying to change my mindset around that. And again, I've got more people in my life who also kind of bang that drum and support that, and that's really helpful to help me to remember that that's okay sometimes as well. So kind of reframing the mindset around it, I think, can also really help to just be like, actually, that was a really great thing to do because I needed that, and then reset and go through that.
100%.
Pick it back up.
Take stock and work out what's important and what's not. And that was another thing that helped me, is I felt like I was in this hamster wheel because all I was doing was brain dumping everything I knew about finance onto one Apple note, which ended up being about 20,000 words long. And I just felt like every day I got up and typed, but I didn't actually know or feel like if I was getting anywhere. But what you say, you look through your diary like, okay, what's important, what isn't? And the biggest thing that helped me get back on track was breaking down everything into segments so I could work out and prioritize, okay, this needs doing first, then this. And not only do you then have structure and you understand where you're at and you don't feel like you're in some perpetual hamster wheel, you also get that little dopamine hit every time you've ticked one of those tasks off.
Yeah.
And that can help give you that spur on to keep going and finish everything.
Yeah, totally. And I think so often, and I'm definitely guilty of this a lot of the time, I know I've got so much in my head and I sort of sit at my laptop and I just go straight into it. And then I'm kind of all over the spot because I've got so much to do. And whether this might be to do with work or to do with On the Rise or just like kind of family life admin. But if you just spend like 5 minutes at the beginning going, okay, what do I actually need to achieve today? Or what do I need to achieve by this time? And what is my priority, maybe someone else's priority, because you might be reporting to somebody or you might need to get back to somebody on something. And if you just spend like 5 minutes thinking about what you're going to do for that day, or even what you're going to do for the next 2 hours. And I was a big fan of time blocking. It's not as easy for me right now, but then that 5 minutes is going to help you be so much more effective and efficient the rest of the day. And if you can also be somebody with, like I am, with like routine, then you just block it in. Like my workouts, as much as possible, are in the diary, and they're treated the same way as everything else where possible. So that again can just sort of help build that kind of regularity. So there's so much around time blocking and like time management, but I think that can definitely help anybody approach things more effectively and efficiently, especially if you're wearing multiple hats. And, a lot of the, our members from On the Rise and my, friendship group, that we're all, either full-time working or entrepreneurs or mums or a bit of everything. And so without any systems, it's tough to kind of get things done in terms of like the working day. And then you've obviously got other roles to fulfill as well. So that certainly seems to have helped me in practice.
Okay, I think I've seen you be such a positive impact and influence on so many people here in KL, and I'm hoping that this podcast will help your positive influence spread a little bit more worldwide as well.
Oh, I hope so, yeah.
Any final words for anyone listening might be looking to start a business or get into networking themselves?
I think, in terms of starting a business, definitely having good people and good sounding boards that you can reach out to is a huge help, because otherwise it's just all in your head and it's not really real yet, and you can just be seen with so many obstacles, and you can't necessarily be accountable to yourself in the same way. So I think finding a good friend or somebody in your network that you can reach out to and just say, can I buy you a coffee, and just share some ideas, and can you just give me some feedback, just be a sounding board. And I think as long as you can also be that for other people, that will kind of come into your life as well. So finding good people and surrounding yourself with good people is something, it's like one of my, I guess, life mottos, but also what I bring into On the Rise. And I think it can be so helpful for people who are struggling at the beginning, or even just any kind of decision in life, if you're facing it, finding people that you can and have on your sounding board. I think, finding a community that you really resonate with and identify with can be so powerful for lots of different reasons. So whether that's On the Rise, that's fantastic. But if it's not, there are lots of other variations of communities that exist, formal and informal. But finding your tribe and your village that you can lean on is so valuable. And I think alongside all of that, just investing some time to find out, or to kind of query and question who you are as well as a person, is going to go a long way to, I think, unlocking other blocks, because those blocks or those challenges or those wounds that we hold with us, they come back again later on in life. And if they're not dealt with and they're swept under the carpet, or they're just kind of ignored, they're not going anywhere. They're still going to be there. So investing time to that, whether it's with professional help or whether it's again with some kind of support from your own existing community, can be so powerful and will help unlock the potential growth for your life. And that's certainly something that I'm focusing on and like to think that, or hope that, On the Rise and can be a part of that for a lot of people as well.
I think what you touched on there, finding yourself and finding community, the two can help each other, because you'll find people that you fit in with and you'll find people that you don't. And that's something you realize when you keep upping sticks and going and setting up roots in new countries, that some groups you'll click with. So by networking, you meet other people, you experience other kind of connections. If you haven't got people in your life already that you can bounce business ideas off, they are out there. And it's not that you're not capable of having those conversations. Yeah. You just haven't found that person yet. Yeah, totally. And I think one of the things as an expat, again, like I've maybe been here 17 years, but in that time, countless friends and contacts have been in and out of my life and in and out of KL. And we're constantly the people saying goodbye as people go off on their travels, and we stayed in Malaysia. But I feel really strongly that you just never know the impact of a connection or of a friendship can have, and even in a very short period of time. And I think being an expat or being exposed to that kind of life, you see that so much more, because we're all overseas. Our friends and our family from home are not here. So you kind of have to be more open. You have to be more vulnerable. And
I think that's actually one of the most magical things about being an expat and living in an expat community, because there is that openness. And so whether it's say a friendship or a business connection, once you know really who you are and you get a sense of being around the good people, you'll feel that. Like if something feels good and there's an instant kind of spark, it's something that you can really lean into and follow, and that will only be felt, I think, if it's a mutual thing. A bit like love. But like, if you can find those true people and know the people who don't bring that out in you, the people who don't bring you joy and that don't make you feel good and who kind of just make you feel like, oh, this is not quite right, then just walk away, and there will be other people. It's not a reflection of you. You just haven't found the right people. I just think that can be so powerful.
100%. And I'm sorry, I've got one more question. Trying to wrap it up. But one thing I also wanted to ask you is, we touched on how people can get into networking when they haven't done that before. But again, a lot of people won't have the facilities that are available here. And you've started your own network. What advice would you give to anyone to start their own network?
I think start really small. Like, you don't have to think of a network or as a community as like hundreds of people buying tickets. Literally On the Rise started with 8 people having coffee in Bangsar, and it just spiraled from there. And I definitely didn't have a game plan. I just thought, let's see where this goes. And I remember vividly standing at that first event going, hi guys, welcome to this event. We didn't even have a name. I don't think. It was just, or maybe the name was already there, but it was just kind of like, I don't know what this is. I don't know what, it's just come and have a really fantastic evening, and I'll kind of let you know what's happening next. And if you're open and honest and you're kind of putting yourself out there, then the right people will find you. So starting really small, and like, I kind of like this sort of perfectly imperfectly fall forward into whatever feels good, because as long as you're being true to yourself, and as long as you're feeling like you're creating something that you can be proudly putting your name to, then the rest will follow. And it doesn't have to have, if you're looking at that being a real business, then probably you want to look at it a bit differently. On the Rise is a non-profit, and we're not set up in that sort of way. But I think to just start really small, like anything, just kind of do the best you can and start small and get feedback. And that's something that I'm really passionate about in life. I think it's awesome just asking people for feedback and making sure that you just always got a loop of feedback, personally, professionally, and in business, but also especially when you're starting something out. Like every single event we do, we ask for we do a feedback form afterwards. Lots of people don't fill it out, but when they do, it's great. And or just personally approaching people to say, how was the event? What was your favorite thing? What did you love about it? What would you love to do more? Because a community has to be an ecosystem. It has to be a shared space that is valued and trusted by everybody in it. And it has to be a two-way conversation. If it's not really a community. So I think if you set that up from the beginning with real intention, and you celebrate the community, you celebrate your members, you're really a part of it, not just the top. It's so critical to setting the right foundations, and then evolving it and putting your own stamp on it. There's loads of communities all over the world. Some who are there to make money, some are there not. So just figuring out exactly what you want to stand for and what you want this community or this network or to be, and then lead from there and lead from integrity. And I don't think you can go too wrong from there.
And I think wanting to be a part of it is one of the biggest things as well, because people can smell when you are just there to market your own product and not to build the connections or give back to it, right? So integrate yourself into the community, and then the business leads that you're looking for will come. Yeah,
absolutely. And you always want it to be kind of like mutually beneficial for everybody, and you want people to be a part of it. But I think you've got to find that like connection culture, that community culture in yourself, to be able to lead a community and to be able to and not just lead, but actually create a community space that would exist if you were to leave tomorrow. Like, I truly believe that if I was to say, look, I'm kind of out, I think there would be a future for On the Rise, because it's never really been about myself. It's the people who are there and the people who are a part of it. And I think if you can't build that, or if you can't possibly step away, if you can't possibly be at an event, then
it's a cult, not a community.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah, exactly. Like it's definitely very different. And you've got to cultivate it in yourself as a leader, and then be able to find the right people, and then ultimately the right people will find you.
Great. Well, Kate, thank you so much for coming on. I've been trying to get you on for about 2 months.
I know exactly the timing. But yeah, thank you so much for having me.
No, pleasure. And if people want to catch up with On the Rise, where can they go?
Mostly active on our Instagram. So that's just @OnTheRiseKL. And we also have a website as well, ontherisekl.com. And we'll be there.
I'll put the links in the description. Kate, thanks so much.
Thank you.